Okay, this is Jonathan Mark. I'm with Flyby News here at Greenfield Community Television. I've been doing a series of different interviews with different, I call celebrities and heroes in our world, from Senator Mike Gravel and Leonard Horowitz to Robert Bowman and the filmmakers of The Reflecting Pool about 9/11. Today I have a special guest, Peter Janney, who wrote this book called Mary's Mosaic, the CIA's conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and their vision for world peace. It's one of the best books I've read in a long time. It's very timely. I've been praying for something like this to come about because of the upcoming 50th anniversary. And so I just want to welcome you, Peter, and it's a pleasure to have you come to Greenfield, Mass.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, tonight we go to Northampton, and you're going to be doing a presentation of your book, and I'm sure you'll be showing it from the beginning to the end of how it all came together. And from Flyby News perspective, we've been dealing with the military-industrial complex ever since the weaponization of space after 9/11, because we were trying to have world peace and abolition of weapons of mass destruction. And nothing worked because, you know, 9/11 happened, and you'd figure by the 10th anniversary something would break in that case. But then you look at your work and how long this has been going on, and then I started seeing that there's a longer history than any of us are aware of in these elements that we're dealing with, and regarding the military-industrial complex and the coup d'etat that I think we both agree happened on November 22nd, 1963. Can you tell me your history of becoming aware of that event and how that affected you and your relations with yourself and your family and your country?
I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
I think the place to start is, you know, when I was in college, I became very curious about our country's history. And I was quite fortunate when I was an undergraduate at Princeton to be connected up with this history professor by the name of Martin Duberman, who's a very kind of a legend in his own class. He just written some great books. He's won a number of awards. He's done a lot of history with regard to the civil rights movement. He's also an established playwright. So my sort of tutelage with him allowed me to really begin to understand what history was and how it's controlled to a large degree by the historian. Right. And when we read history, we forget sometimes that the historian that put together the history that we're reading has his or her own biases as to what perspective they're going to take. So that was my initial piece in terms of really becoming awakened to sort of the politics of history and how it's written and how it's used as propaganda. I think your audience, well, if they don't know already, you know, I grew up in a family where my father was a very high-level official in the Central Intelligence Agency during the Cold War. This was in the 1950s and 1960s. And I had no idea of what was going on during that era in terms of how the CIA had infiltrated not only our media, but just our general cultural perspective and what they were really up to. So my awakening was gradual. It took place in stages, and it took me a long time to get where I am today.
So when you started questioning the Warren Commission, when was that, and where did that lead, and how that began?
Well, I started questioning the Warren Commission, I believe, in the summer of 1966. And I had just graduated from high school, and I was aware of some of what Jim Garrison was getting involved with down in New Orleans, and I was curious about it. But every time I brought the subject matter up to my father, he got very, very angry that I should even, you know, be interested in something like this, because he wanted to quickly dispel as quickly as possible that this was nothing but hogwash. But as I got in, that fall I went to college, and of course the Vietnam War was really ramping up. And being sort of a prime draftee candidate, even though I had a college deferment at the time, I really started to turn my focus toward the Vietnam and begin to question quite seriously what we were doing in Southeast Asia and what was the CIA doing there. And that sort of really began to open up the floodgates.
Right. It was like a war during peacetime.
It was a war during peacetime, and it was, I think, an awakening in our culture where people really began to question authority and just not take it in terms of whatever propaganda was coming at them. The atrocity of the Vietnam War, I think, was just so profound to many of my generation as we really became closer to get face-to-face to this, that it sort of pushed us all to really examine from many different perspectives what was going on here.
It's fascinating because I had the same experience. I started my first year of college after going to Woodstock Music Festival, and you know, and had a hard time relating to college because of the war. It was during the Kent State massacre in Jackson State. Students were being killed. I went to Washington, D.C. for the 100,000 moratorium for peace, where the whole city was shut down under curfew, and it was like a 1984 scene when Allen Ginsberg was on the corner, he was chanting Om, and they were throwing rockets over our heads, and it made me think of Vietnam, where the rockets weren't just pepper gas, they just explode you, or the napalm or something. And felt an identity with that, and it kind of led me to dropping out of college because of the confrontation with our spiritual value. Maybe that's why we were here. You know, we were all grown up to be like all Americans in a way, with you know, the age of television. You know, how that affected us, and how that, you know, set us up for, you know, believing in our country in some ways, and then all of a sudden, you know, growing up and then realizing that the whole story was much, much different than we perceived. So it's interesting that we could, you know, a few of us could stay awake and all that, and a lot of people chose to be distracted or to make their lives so they could be in denial of the realities that were going on. And I don't know if some of us could do that, because for me, my background was Jewish. I was thinking about the Holocaust and you know, what would I do if I knew what was going on? So it brings up a lot of issues for me to see how many people don't want to know the truth, and if you bring it up, they respond almost angrily or saying, "What are you doing?" And then I say, well, that's what the project was designed to do, you know, and that's what we're up against. So you bringing this personal human interest story gives it so much more of a flavor that if we can get beyond the censorship by the mainstream media, this would be a blockbuster and should be a movie and everything else. So I want you to give me the overview of the book, if you can. And when did your father pass?
He died very early in 1979. He was only 59 years old.
Wow.
Died very suddenly of a heart attack.
So you didn't really have that talk where there's some resolution?
No, we didn't. And that was, you know, a painful event in my life. I mean, essentially, my relationship with both my parents, I think, really came to a grinding halt, a kind of clear demarcation in the sand as we got into the Vietnam era of the late 1960s. It was very, very difficult. And fortunately for me, you know, there were a number of us who grew up in Washington who had fathers involved in politics or the CIA or the State Department who were, you know, running into this problem. You know, our parents were relatively pretty hawkish. I think some of our mothers became more and more left-leaning in the late 60s when they saw what the toll of the war was doing. But it was a very, in some ways, tragic time for us in families, because we had to grow up very quickly. You know, and I think whether that, I mean, that was good or not bad, it happened. You know, I think the counterculture movement of the 1960s was really had a profound impact on our country. And I think for many of us who were emerging into adulthood at that time, it was a very pivotal point in our lives, because we really had to grow up and stand on our own 2 feet and separate to one degree or another from our family's point of view, and that was, you know, it was a little scary.
The American dream or the American nightmare, depending on how open you are to the reality of it, for so many people that aren't in positions of comfort and, you know, in situation. I think the new generation since then had confronted the same issues that you did early on with 9/11 happening. I know I've seen a lot of splits in families that people just don't want to hear it. And a lot of younger people saying, this doesn't make sense. I was taught to respect science. I was taught that, you know, we built buildings to have the most resistance, and here these buildings, you know, without any real explanation, because, you know, office fires never brought down steel frame buildings before, just came down at free fall speeds, and you had the BBC recording the building 7 still standing, and she said it came down, and, you know, it was just such a weird day. The day after that, Rumsfeld mentioned $2.3 trillion lost in the Pentagon, and then you have no, you know, air defense 45 minutes after, you know. So the issues of reality and the issues of spin is confronting more and more people than ever, and now I'm trying to connect those 2 issues. Are you able to connect the 9/11 issue and JFK? Just I'm wondering, do you see a relationship there?
I do see a relationship there, and I think what emerges for me is that, you know, the American people have lost control of their democracy. They've lost control of their government. It is no longer a government by the people, for the people, and of the people. The government is intimately connected with corporations and the banking system, and, you know, that's what's ruling the world right now. Sad but true. Right. And I don't know whether it's going to be possible to turn this around in our lifetime. I had a recent discussion about this with the attorney William Pepper, who you may be aware of,
Sure.
who was, you know, a real legend in his own time for having brought out the truth of the Martin Luther King assassination. He's working on the Bobby Kennedy assassination right now in terms of possibly getting Sirhan out of jail. But he is a figure who I think really is on the forefront here of helping people awaken to the fact of, you know, what has taken place in their country. And it's unfortunate because I think most people are just too burdened by life and the demands on life, right, you know, to increasingly become more and more of a public citizen. And no matter, you know, it's not enough anymore to have a career, to raise a family, to, you know, do the little things that we do, because we have to become public citizens now if we're going to emerge from this. We have to engage with the issues of our time. And democracy doesn't come cheap, and it doesn't come free. In order to keep it alive, all of us have to contribute or find a way to contribute in our lives to leave something for our children and our grandchildren when we depart.
You know, I want to back up what you're saying, because the 9/11, 2001 happened right after the election theft of 2000 and the Supreme Court choosing of Bush Jr. And as Bush's father was very much intricately involved with the CIA and the shadow government, the Iran-Contra, and his father was involved with financing World War II and the Nazis. So there was another coup d'état, that, you know, there was still some resistance in our government, and if Gore got in there, possibly then Jefferson Clinton would have freed Leonard Peltier and would have had some backing from Gore. He wouldn't have to worry about getting arrested for lying under oath regarding Monica Lewinsky. Yeah, we have all these coup d'états, and now, because of the 50th anniversary, I'm going to be inviting the public here to the studio to make a statement of what that event 50 years ago meant to them, and maybe what any memories they have of it. And the night before, we're going to be showing a film, Dark Legacy, George Bush and the Murder of John F. Kennedy, and a film compilation short of JFK and the Fed that I produced at the Garden Cinemas here in town, which is how we met, because I was asking you to come and speak there. But you might be going to Dallas that day. Is that still looking?
It's very possible. There are a number of different possibilities, and a bunch of us are trying to figure out how to position ourselves as strategically as possible to do the most good.
And you're connected with Dick Russell, so he's probably guiding you in what you should be doing that day.
Well, Dick is a very good friend. He's been a great supporter of my work and my book, and so I'm in touch with him actually quite frequently, and I marvel at all the things that he's been able to do in terms of his own book. I think The Man That Knew Too Much, his really remarkable book on Richard Case Nagel, is one of the best books on the Kennedy assassination that's ever been written. And, you know, Dick has always been a real inspiration to me. Right.
Well, and George Bush, do you see him as an essential person involved with the CIA at that time when the assassination happened, or at least behind the scenes?
Well, I think clearly there was something going on behind the scenes. I think Russ Baker's book, Family of Secrets, really is quite well researched, and for someone who's really interested in knowing a lot of the little truths and facts and realities that were taking that place around the Bushes, it's a must read. And you know, Mr. Russ does a great job of really showing, you know, what H.W. Bush was up to during the time of the Kennedy assassination. And of course, I think it's really quite clear now that H.W. Bush was working for the CIA long before he became the CIA director.
Right.
And so
there's that memorandum from J. Edgar Hoover that's in Hankey's film, naming George Bush of the CIA and be in charge of the anti-Castro Cubans that were likely involved.
That's right.
And though Russ Baker didn't mention that specifically, or James Douglas in his book, The Unspeakable, so I still think there's an unspeakable element of naming this, what I consider a potential kingpin, because of his relationship with his father, which is why I got involved with the Federal Reserve, because do you know about the coup d'etat that failed in the 1930s in the U.S.?
Well, I know a little bit about it in terms, this is the one you're
Smedley
talking about.
Butler?
Right, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
yes.
Right. Again, William Pepper was instrumental in introducing me to that not too long ago, and I'm already sort of deep in the midst of reading the book, I think it's called The Nazi Hydra in America, that goes into this in some detail. It's fascinating. You know, there's a very interesting quote that President Harry Truman once said, and he said, "The only thing new in the world is the history you don't know." And it's really true. I mean, they're deep in the catacombs of the State Department and the Justice Department. There are confidential files. Some people believe there's literally, we don't know 1/3 of our Cold War history. It's all kept underground. Right. And as we push harder and harder to bring this material out, to pressure whoever we have to pressure to release this kind of information, I think this is part of the process where Americans can retake control over their country. Because without the truth, without the real truth of knowing what our history is, we can't change. And we're destined to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So it's just as it was for me personally in writing Mary's Mosaic. You know, I had to struggle far and wide for many years to get to the bottom of a lot of negativity, where I could finally put these pieces together and show, in the case of what happened to Mary Pinchot Meyer, what was really going on behind the scenes. And you know, no one gets it right. There's always little things that we don't know here, we don't know there. Right. But I think in Mary's Mosaic, I've begun to really unravel, you know, what was going on at that time, partly in terms of her actual relationship with the president, and then what she was facing after his assassination, that last year of her life, where she met her own death.
You know, Mary Pinchot Meyer's son, Michael, who around 8 or 9, he was killed in a car accident in front of his house. It just set the stage for bringing ourselves into it. And I realized a lot of my conditioning, because you do feel mixed about all these, you know, extramarital relationships going on while the world's at the brink of catastrophes, and you wonder, you know, what in the world? But it made me realize how much I was conditioned just from growing up in that era, and what your parents would kind of like find approval in, and how they were part of a dysfunctional family, and it seems like, did that motivate you to go into psychology to deal with all these issues? And
I think that was one dimension of it. You know, I was very fascinated by dimensions of clinical psychology. I was particularly intrigued with the impact that psychedelics were having on our culture, and what their impact was on individuals when they used them judiciously. I myself was a user, but under very controlled circumstances, some of them clinical circumstances, a few times on my own. I was always very intrigued by the writings of Carlos Castaneda, yes. And that, you know, that was an influence for me. So I looked at psychology at that time as a real opening in terms of something that I could do in the world during that part of my life. And I think for the most part, I became a fairly effective, you know, clinical psychologist. But, you know, I'm relieved that I don't have to do it for the rest of my life. You know, I wanted to move on to other things. I was always, and always will be, a student of history, because, you know, you just can't stop learning.
Well, you have a non-judgmental evaluation of the situations that you found yourself. And I'm going to read one sentence from your book. It was page 228, I believe. It says, "Vulnerability isn't necessarily a sign of weakness. Very often, it's the emerging strength of a healing heart crying out for connection." That moved me immensely. I'm usually looking for these quotes at the beginning of the chapters, and this just jumped out.
That particular sentence has to do with the fact that President Kennedy, who had a lot of problems with intimacy, particularly with women, I think really did have a substantial relationship of redemption with Mary Meyer. Yeah. And I think the impact on him was quite profound. I did learn from another author, Leo D'Amour, who knew Kenny O'Donnell, who was JFK's closest advisor, that JFK had told him in October of 1963 that he really thought he was going to divorce Jackie when he got out of office so that he could be with Mary Meyer. And the two, I think, were really forging a relationship that was profound for each of them, but particularly for the president, because he had finally found a woman who he could fully respect, and made no bones about the fact, she made no bones about the fact that when he got out of line, she was going to confront him. And of course, there were remarks that President Kennedy made to Ben Bradley, for instance, about how rough it would be to live with Mary. But he never stopped wanting to be around her. You know, I think he really understood that sometimes her confrontations with him was a trajectory for healing for him. And I think the two of them really started to grow closer and closer, particularly after the Cuban Missile Crisis in late 1962, where I think he really turned away from the Cold War mindset and turned toward the trajectory of creating world peace, doing whatever he could. And of course, the last 6 months of his life really substantiates that.
Most definitely. I get so inspired to see that, because you get the spin part of the Kennedy situation, people putting him down, you know, presenting any of the, the flaws that they could find. But then to hear that speech that he presented to the United Nations, which is in Hankey's film, which moves me immensely. He wanted to basically end the military-industrial complex by, and abolish all weapons of mass destruction by, you know, working together with the Russians at that time and stuff. So his death was a tragedy to our world, and it's on such a big level that it makes you feel like it's almost expected, you know, that the people that had that power and that came in after the atomic bomb was developed, the 1947 National Security Act, when they had no oversight and they could convince themselves that they're being the protectors of our world, but it's really for themselves, and they get corrupted. It's just such a division of who we are as people, going in one direction or another, that's what we're battling. I think that's part of what our life's purpose is about. And November 22nd, 1963 was maybe the most pivotal element, especially for us baby boomers that were around then. I was 12 at the time, and didn't, just was depressed. Yeah.
It definitely was, I think, a pivotal moment in our lifetimes, for sure, and in American history. Something really changed there, and the impact initially was subliminal, because it was such a huge event, and the ramifications of that event were so profound that it took a number of years for people to really understand what had happened. Mm-hmm. And as we sit back now during the 50th year of the anniversary of the JFK assassination, it's clear, you know, or clearer, where we have come from, and unfortunately where we are headed, right, on this current trajectory. And it's unfortunate that our educational system has been so torpedoed in many respects that kids going to high school, and in many instances college today, they don't know the truth of their history. They don't know the truth of their country's history to such a degree where they can really begin to understand what happened back in 1963 and why it is so important that the complete truth come out as quickly as possible. As you know, there are still probably more than 50,000 pages of documents in the National Archives that have yet to be released about the Kennedy assassination, only because the Central Intelligence Agency doesn't want them released. Right. And, you know, this is our history. They have no right to steal our country, to steal our history. As American citizens, we deserve to know the truth. And the old adage that the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable, is pretty apt.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This says quite a bit, and I encourage people to go to marysmosaic.net, and thank you for being here so much.
Great to be with you, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
Yes.